The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Colonel Sarah Chen stood before the war room's massive digital display. Red dots scattered across the tactical map like drops of blood, each one representing enemy positions that had cost them 3 failed missions and dozens of good soldiers. The air in the room was thick with tension and the bitter taste of recent defeats. General Morrison, a man whose weathered face told stories of countless battles, leaned back in his chair and studied the intelligence reports one more time. His fingers drummed against the polished table as he absorbed the grim reality before them. 3 enemy generals had positioned themselves in what appeared to be an impenetrable fortress deep within hostile territory. Previous reconnaissance missions had revealed layers of security that seemed designed by someone who understood every weakness in modern military strategy. Sarah had been studying these same reports for weeks, her analytical mind picking apart every detail like a surgeon examining a patient. She noticed patterns that others missed, gaps in the enemy's defenses that existed for mere seconds during shift changes. Her reputation for unconventional thinking had earned her both respect and skepticism from her peers. But today she needed more than reputation to convince the command structure. The briefing room filled with murmurs as other officers discussed the impossibility of the mission. Captain Rodriguez shook his head while pointing at aerial photographs that showed concentric circles of armed guards, electronic surveillance systems, and natural barriers that made the enemy stronghold look like something from a military textbook, on perfect defensive positioning. Lieutenant Commander Davis traced potential approach routes on his tablet, each one ending in failure scenarios that would cost more lives than they could afford to lose. Sarah cleared her throat and stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor with a confidence that surprised everyone in the room. She had spent countless hours not just studying the enemy positions, but understanding the psychology of the generals they faced. Each man had distinct patterns, predictable routines that could be exploited if someone was willing to think beyond traditional military doctrine. Her plan wasn't just about defeating an enemy, it was about understanding human nature under pressure. General Morrison's eyes fixed on Sarah as she began to outline her approach. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of electronic equipment and the distant sounds of base operations continuing outside their walls. Her words carried the weight of careful analysis mixed with intuitive understanding that came from years of studying not just tactics, but people. She spoke about timing, about psychological warfare, and about exploiting the very confidence that made the enemy generals believe they were untouchable. The skepticism in the room was almost tangible. Officers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their doubts regarding this unconventional approach. These were men and women who had built their careers on established military principles, on overwhelming force and careful positioning. Sarah's plan seemed to throw conventional wisdom out the window in favor of something that sounded more like a gamble than a military operation. Yet as she continued speaking, something began to shift in the atmosphere. Her confidence wasn't the bravado of someone trying to prove a point. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had found a solution that others couldn't see. She answered every technical question with precise detail, addressed every concern with backup plans that showed she had thought through scenarios that her critics hadn't even considered. General Morrison found himself leaning forward, his experienced military mind beginning to see the possibilities that Sarah was presenting. The plan was audacious, certainly, but it was also brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to overwhelm a superior defensive position, she proposed to turn the enemy's strengths into weaknesses, to use their confidence and predictable patterns against them in ways they would never anticipate. The debate that followed was intense, but respectful. Officers who had initially dismissed her proposal began asking detailed questions about logistics, timing, and contingency plans. Sarah answered each inquiry with the thoroughness of someone who had spent months preparing for exactly these challenges. Her responses revealed layers of planning that went far beyond what anyone had initially realized. As the discussion continued, the mood in the room gradually shifted from skepticism to cautious interest, then to something approaching excitement. Here was a plan that could actually work, not because it overpowered the enemy, but because it outsmarted them. It required precision, perfect timing, and nerves of steel, but it offered something that previous failed missions had lacked: a real chance of success without catastrophic casualties. The final moments of the briefing were filled with the kind of focused energy that comes when military professionals recognize a genuinely innovative solution to an impossible problem. Sarah stood before the tactical display, her plan now outlined in detail across multiple screens, showing approach routes, timing sequences, and contingency measures that addressed every concern raised during the discussion. General Morrison's expression had transformed from skeptical authority figure to interested commander evaluating a promising new strategy. The transformation wasn't lost on anyone in the room, and it signaled a shift in how Sarah's proposal would be received by the broader command structure. This wasn't just another desperate attempt to solve an unsolvable problem. This was military innovation at its finest. General Morrison's weathered hand moved slowly across the tactical display, tracing the routes Sarah had outlined with the careful attention of someone who had seen too many good soldiers die from poorly planned operations. The silence in the war room stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the steady hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of helicopters returning from routine patrols. Every officer present understood that this moment would determine whether they continued accepting failure or embraced a solution that challenged everything they thought they knew about military strategy. The general's reputation for conservative military thinking was well known throughout the command structure. He had built his career on methodical planning, overwhelming firepower, and careful risk assessment that prioritized soldier safety above all else. His previous rejections of unconventional approaches had become legendary among younger officers, who sometimes felt that innovation was being sacrificed for the sake of traditional military doctrine. Today's decision would either reinforce that reputation or mark a dramatic shift in his leadership philosophy. Sarah remained at attention while her superior deliberated, but her mind was already racing through the intricate details of her proposed operation. She had spent months studying not just the enemy positions, but the psychological profiles of the three generals they faced. Each man had distinct personalities that manifested in predictable behavioral patterns, from General Kozlov's obsession with punctuality to General Hassan's tendency to personally inspect perimeter defenses during specific weather conditions. These human elements were the foundation of her strategy. Captain Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still struggling to accept that such an audacious plan could succeed where conventional military approaches had failed repeatedly. His experience with traditional warfare made him instinctively skeptical of anything that relied more on psychology and timing than on superior firepower and tactical positioning. Yet the detailed analysis Sarah had presented was beginning to chip away at his reservations, revealing possibilities he hadn't previously considered. The intelligence reports spread across the conference table told a story of enemy confidence, bordering on arrogance. The three generals had established their stronghold with such meticulous defensive planning that they had become comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, in their apparent invulnerability. Sarah's analysis suggested that this confidence had created blind spots in their security protocols, moments of predictable routine that could be exploited by someone willing to think beyond conventional military doctrine. Lieutenant Commander Davis pulled up additional satellite imagery on his tablet, cross-referencing Sarah's proposed timing with recent surveillance data. The patterns she had identified were subtle but undeniable once you knew what to look for. Guard rotations followed precise schedules, communication protocols created brief windows of vulnerability, and the natural terrain offered concealment, opportunities that previous missions had overlooked because they were focused on overwhelming force rather than surgical precision. General Morrison finally broke the silence, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions that had shaped countless military careers. His words were measured and deliberate, reflecting the careful consideration he had given to every aspect of Sarah's proposal. He acknowledged the audacity of the plan, while recognizing the thoroughness of the preparation that had gone into its development. This wasn't a desperate gamble born from frustration with previous failures. This was innovative military thinking backed by meticulous analysis. The room's atmosphere shifted perceptibly as the general's approval became apparent. Officers who had been quietly skeptical found themselves leaning forward with renewed interest, their professional minds beginning to engage with the tactical possibilities Sarah had outlined. The transformation from doubt to cautious optimism was almost tangible, like watching a military unit discover new capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Sarah felt a surge of validation mixed with the sobering responsibility that came with having her unconventional approach officially sanctioned. This was no longer a theoretical exercise or an academic discussion about military innovation. Real lives would depend on the accuracy of her analysis and the precision of her planning. The three enemy generals she had studied so carefully would soon discover whether their apparent invulnerability was real or merely an illusion created by their own success. The detailed planning phase that followed Morrison's approval revealed the true complexity of Sarah's strategy. Every element of the operation required precise coordination, from the timing of diversionary actions to the psychological manipulation of enemy response patterns. She had identified not just the physical weaknesses in the enemy's defensive position, but the human weaknesses in the men who commanded those defenses. Preparation began immediately, with specialized equipment requisitioned and personnel selected, based on specific skill sets rather than conventional military qualifications. Sarah's approach required soldiers who could think independently while maintaining perfect coordination, individuals capable of adapting to rapidly changing circumstances without losing sight of the overall mission objectives. The selection process revealed how different this operation would be from traditional military engagements. Communication protocols were established that reflected the unconventional nature of the mission. Instead of relying on standard military channels that the enemy might intercept or predict, Sarah's plan incorporated deception elements that would mislead hostile intelligence while ensuring that friendly forces remained perfectly coordinated. Every message would serve dual purposes, maintaining operational security while psychologically manipulating enemy expectations. The final briefing session before deployment was charged with an energy that reflected both excitement and apprehension. Officers who had initially questioned Sarah's approach now found themselves admiring the elegance of her solution to an apparently impossible problem. The plan's complexity was matched by its psychological sophistication, revealing layers of strategic thinking that went far beyond conventional military education. As the meeting concluded, General Morrison approached Sarah privately, his expression reflecting both respect for her innovative thinking and concern for the enormous responsibility she was about to shoulder. His final words carried the weight of command authority mixed with personal investment in her success, acknowledging that she was about to attempt something that would either revolutionize military strategy or serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of abandoning proven methods. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Sarah like a familiar blanket as she made final adjustments to her specialized equipment. Every piece of gear had been selected for maximum effectiveness with minimal detection signatures, from her modified communication system to the precision instruments that would make her unconventional strategy possible. The weight of responsibility pressed against her shoulders like the tactical vest she wore, but her hands remained steady as she completed her preparations. Her selected team gathered in the staging area with the quiet efficiency of professionals who understood that their lives depended on perfect execution of an unprecedented plan. Sergeant Martinez checked his equipment with the methodical precision that had made him legendary among special operations forces, while Corporal Williams reviewed digital maps that showed approach routes no previous mission had attempted. Each team member had been chosen for specific skills that traditional military operations rarely required. The enemy stronghold lay 15 kilometers ahead, hidden within terrain that seemed designed by nature to repel any conventional assault. Previous intelligence reports had described the position as virtually impregnable, protected by overlapping fields of fire, electronic surveillance systems, and natural barriers that channeled any approaching force into predetermined killing zones. Sarah's analysis had revealed that these same defensive advantages could become fatal weaknesses if approached with the right psychological understanding. General Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece during the final communication check, his words carrying both authority and personal concern for her welfare. The command center remained fully operational despite the early hour, with intelligence analysts monitoring enemy communications for any signs that their plan had been detected. So far, The three target generals appeared to be maintaining their normal routines, unaware that their predictable patterns were about to become the foundation for their own defeat. Sarah's approach to the mission defied every principle of conventional military doctrine. Instead of attempting to overwhelm superior defensive positions with firepower, she planned to exploit the psychological weaknesses she had identified in each enemy commander. General Kozlov's obsessive punctuality meant he would be in a specific location at a predictable time, while General Hassan's personal inspection habits created windows of vulnerability that had never been exploited because no one had recognized their significance. The terrain between her position and the enemy stronghold offered concealment opportunities that previous missions had overlooked because they were focused on direct assault routes rather than psychological manipulation. Sarah's path would take her through areas that appeared tactically insignificant but provided perfect positioning for the kind of precision strikes her plan required. Every meter of the approach had been analyzed not just for physical obstacles but for psychological impact on enemy decision-making processes. Movement toward the target began with surgical precision, each step calculated to avoid detection while positioning her team for maximum psychological effect. The enemy's confidence in their defensive superiority had made them predictable, following security protocols that were militarily sound but psychologically exploitable. Sarah's understanding of human nature under pressure was about to be tested against three of the most experienced military commanders in the opposing force. Electronic surveillance systems that had defeated previous missions were neutralized, not through technological superiority, but through psychological misdirection that made the defenders see exactly what they expected to see, while missing what was actually happening. Sarah's approach turned the enemy's own competence against them, using their professional expectations to create blind spots in their perception of the tactical situation developing around their position. The first phase of her operation unfolded, with the quiet efficiency that marked truly professional military work. Diversionary actions began precisely on schedule, creating the kind of minor disturbances that would attract attention without seeming significant enough to warrant major defensive responses. Each distraction was carefully calibrated to reinforce enemy expectations while positioning Sarah's actual strike force in locations no conventional military planner would consider viable. Communications intercepts revealed that the enemy commanders were responding exactly as Sarah's psychological profiles had predicted. General Kozlov's radio traffic showed his characteristic concern with maintaining precise schedules despite minor security alerts, while General Hassan's transmissions indicated he was personally investigating perimeter disturbances according to his established patterns. The third general, Morrison, was coordinating responses in a manner that revealed his location and intentions to anyone who understood his decision-making psychology. Sarah's position allowed her to observe the enemy stronghold with clarity that previous reconnaissance missions had never achieved. The defensive positions that had seemed impregnable from conventional approach angles revealed vulnerabilities when viewed through the lens of psychological manipulation rather than direct assault. Guard positions that appeared randomly distributed actually followed patterns that reflected each commander's personal security philosophy, creating exploitable weaknesses for someone who understood the thinking behind the positioning. The precision, timing that her plan required began to synchronize with enemy movements in ways that seemed almost supernatural to observers who didn't understand the psychological foundation of her strategy. Every element of the operation was unfolding according to analysis of human behavior under specific conditions, turning military science into something that resembled psychological warfare elevated to the level of tactical art. Final preparations. For the decisive phase required Sarah to position herself in locations that conventional military wisdom would consider exposed and tactically unsound. Her understanding of enemy psychology had revealed that the most dangerous positions from a traditional perspective were actually the safest, because they were so unexpected that trained military minds would dismiss them as impossible. The enemy's professional competence was becoming the foundation for their own tactical blindness. As the critical moment approached, Sarah's communication with her team became increasingly minimal, relying on pre-established signals that reflected perfect coordination achieved through understanding rather than constant direction. Each team member knew exactly what was expected, because they understood not just their own role, but the psychological dynamics that would drive enemy responses to their actions. The moment of truth arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that separated exceptional military leaders from merely competent ones. Sarah's position offered her a perfect view of the enemy stronghold as the three generals unknowingly moved into the precise locations her psychological analysis had predicted. General Kozlov stood at his command post checking his watch with the mechanical precision that had made him predictable, while General Hassan emerged from the main bunker to personally inspect defensive positions according to his unchanging routine. Every second of the approaching engagement had been rehearsed mentally dozens of times, but the reality of facing three experienced enemy commanders simultaneously created a tension that no amount of preparation could entirely eliminate. Sarah's breathing remained controlled and steady as she made final adjustments to her equipment, knowing that the next few minutes would either validate months of unconventional planning or result in catastrophic failure that would cost lives and credibility. The electronic warfare component of her strategy began with subtle interference that the enemy's communication systems would interpret as routine atmospheric disturbance rather than deliberate jamming. This psychological misdirection was crucial because obvious electronic attack would trigger immediate defensive responses that could disrupt her carefully orchestrated timing. Instead, the enemy commanders found their communications degraded just enough to create frustration, without recognizing they were under attack. Sarah's understanding of military psychology had revealed that experienced commanders respond to communication problems with predictable patterns of behavior. General Kozlov would attempt to restore communications through backup systems, moving him to a secondary command position that was less protected than his primary location. General Hassan would personally investigate potential equipment failures, drawing him away from his security detail into areas where he became vulnerable to precision targeting. The third general, whose movements Sarah had been tracking through careful analysis of command patterns, was responding to the minor communications disruption exactly as her psychological profile had predicted. His attempts to coordinate with his fellow commanders were creating exactly the kind of positional isolation that her unconventional strategy required. Three supposedly impregnable defensive positions were becoming three separate vulnerable targets through nothing more than exploiting human nature under pressure. Visual confirmation of enemy positions came through specialized optics that allowed Sarah to observe target movement without revealing her own location. The enemy's defensive superiority depended on their ability to coordinate overlapping fields of fire and mutual support, but the minor communication problems were gradually isolating each general from the others in ways they didn't recognize. Their professional competence was actually working against them, as they followed established protocols that Sarah's analysis had identified as exploitable. The precision required for simultaneous engagement of three separate targets would have been impossible using conventional military approaches, but Sarah's strategy didn't rely on overwhelming firepower or superior positioning. Instead, she had created conditions where each enemy general would be psychologically prepared to interpret her actions as something other than what they actually were. The art of misdirection elevated to the level of tactical genius. Timing became everything as the critical moment approached. Sarah's equipment registered the exact positions of all three targets, while her communication system confirmed that her support team was ready to provide the kind of precise coordination that her plan required. Years of military training combined with months of specific preparation for this unprecedented operation culminated in a few seconds that would determine whether innovative thinking could triumph over conventional defensive superiority. The first strike occurred with surgical precision that reflected both technical skill and psychological understanding of how the enemy would respond to unexpected attack. General Kozlov's position at the secondary command post made him vulnerable in ways that his primary location would not have been, and his elimination was accomplished before his security detail could react effectively. The speed and precision of the attack created exactly the kind of confusion that Sarah's plan required for the subsequent phases. General Hassan's elimination followed within seconds, taking advantage of his predictable response to the first attack and his isolated position. During equipment inspection, his personal involvement in security procedures, which had made him an effective commander in conventional situations, became the weakness that allowed Sarah to neutralize him before coordinated defensive responses could develop. The psychological accuracy of her planning was proving itself under the ultimate test of actual combat. The third general's elimination completed a sequence that had seemed impossible to every conventional military analysis. His attempts to coordinate defensive responses to the first two attacks had positioned him exactly where Sarah's psychological profile indicated he would be, making him vulnerable to precision targeting that exploited his predictable decision-making patterns under stress. 3 separate defensive positions had been neutralized through understanding human psychology, rather than overwhelming military force. Enemy forces throughout the stronghold found themselves leaderless and confused, with their communication systems degraded just enough to prevent effective coordination of counterattacks. The defensive positions that had seemed impregnable were now isolated strong points without unified command or clear understanding of what had happened to their leadership. Sarah's unconventional approach had achieved in minutes what months of conventional military planning had failed to accomplish. The psychological impact on remaining enemy forces was immediate and devastating. Soldiers who had been confident in their defensive superiority suddenly found themselves without leadership or clear understanding of the tactical situation. The speed and precision of the attacks on their commanders created exactly the kind of demoralization that Sarah had predicted, turning professional military units into confused individuals, uncertain about how to respond to an unprecedented situation. Confirmation of mission success came through multiple channels as intelligence monitoring revealed the complete disruption of enemy command structure. The 3 generals who had seemed untouchable just minutes earlier were no longer factors in the tactical equation, and their supposedly impregnable stronghold was rapidly dissolving into isolated pockets of confused resistance. Sarah's psychological warfare had achieved something that conventional military doctrine had declared impossible. The elegance of her solution became apparent to observers who had initially questioned her unconventional approach. Instead of attempting to overcome superior defensive positions through brute force, she had turned the enemy's strengths into weaknesses by understanding the human element that conventional military planning often overlooked. The general's professional competence had become the foundation for their own defeat, through nothing more than careful analysis of predictable human behavior under specific conditions. The silence that followed the successful elimination of all 3 enemy generals was profound and unsettling, broken only by the distant sounds of confused radio chatter from leaderless enemy units scattered throughout the stronghold. Sarah maintained her position while conducting rapid damage assessment, confirming that her unprecedented operation had achieved complete success without the massive casualties that conventional approaches would have required. The psychological impact on remaining enemy forces was exactly what her analysis had predicted. Intelligence intercepts revealed the immediate aftermath of decapitated enemy command structure as individual units attempted to establish communication with leaders who would never respond again. The professional military training that had made these forces formidable under unified command was now working against them as they followed protocols designed for situations that no longer existed. Sarah's understanding of military psychology was proving itself in ways that extended far beyond the initial elimination of primary targets. Her extraction from the immediate area required the same precision and psychological insight that had made the primary mission successful. Enemy forces were responding to their leadership vacuum with predictable patterns of behavior that Sarah had anticipated and planned for during her months of preparation. Confusion and lack of coordination created opportunities for movement that would have been impossible while the 3 generals maintained effective command of their defensive positions. The enemy stronghold that had seemed impregnable just hours earlier was rapidly transforming into a collection of isolated defensive positions without unified purpose or coordinated strategy. Individual unit commanders were making decisions based on incomplete information and personal interpretations of tactical situations they didn't fully understand. The psychological foundation of effective military organization was crumbling under the impact of Sarah's unconventional approach to an impossible problem. Communication with her own command structure confirmed that the broader strategic situation was developing exactly as her planning had anticipated. The elimination of the 3 enemy generals had created tactical opportunities that conventional military doctrine could now exploit effectively. Her innovative approach had not replaced traditional military methods, but had created conditions where those methods could achieve decisive success rather than costly stalemate. General Morrison's voice carried unmistakable satisfaction and professional admiration as he received Sarah's mission report through secure communication channels. The skepticism that had initially greeted her unconventional proposal had been completely vindicated by results that exceeded even her own optimistic projections. 3 enemy commanders who had seemed untouchable were no longer factors in the strategic equation, and the stronghold that had resisted multiple conventional assaults was now vulnerable to standard military operations. The psychological impact on friendly forces was equally significant as news of Sarah's success spread through the command structure. Officers who had questioned her innovative approach found themselves reconsidering fundamental assumptions about military strategy and the role of psychological analysis in tactical planning. The successful completion of an impossible mission was forcing a reevaluation of conventional wisdom that had dominated military thinking for decades. Enemy resistance began collapsing with the kind of systematic inevitability that characterized military operations where one side had achieved decisive psychological advantage. Individual units that had fought effectively under unified command found themselves increasingly isolated and demoralized as the reality of their situation became apparent. Sarah's understanding of human nature under stress had created conditions that extended far beyond the immediate tactical success of eliminating 3 specific targets. The strategic implications of her success were becoming apparent to intelligence analysts who had been monitoring the broader conflict. The enemy coalition that had seemed cohesive and determined was beginning to show signs of fracture as news of the general's elimination spread through their command structure. The psychological impact of Sarah's achievement was rippling through enemy forces in ways that would influence the entire strategic situation. Detailed after-action analysis revealed the sophisticated planning that had made Sarah's success possible. Every element of her operation had been calculated not just for immediate tactical effect, but for broader psychological impact on enemy decision-making processes. The elimination of 3 specific individuals had created cascading effects throughout the enemy organization that demonstrated the power of understanding human psychology at the strategic level. Her extraction route took her through terrain that had been transformed by her success from enemy-controlled territory into confused battle space, where traditional defensive advantages no longer applied effectively. The same psychological analysis that had enabled her to eliminate the 3 generals was now facilitating safe movement through areas that would have been impassable while effective enemy command structure remained intact. The professional military community was already beginning to analyze Sarah's approach for lessons that could be applied to future operations. Her integration of psychological analysis with traditional military planning represented a significant evolution in tactical thinking that promised to influence military education and doctrine development. The impossible mission had become a case study in innovative problem-solving that transcended conventional limitations through understanding human nature. Command authority for the entire operation was shifting to capitalize on the opportunities Sarah's success had created. Military units that had been unable to make progress against the enemy stronghold were now repositioning for decisive action against demoralized and confused defenders. The psychological advantage gained through innovative thinking was being translated into conventional military success that validated her unconventional approach. International intelligence services were taking note of Sarah's achievement as reports of the successful operation filtered through diplomatic and military channels. The demonstration that seemingly impossible missions could be accomplished through psychological insight rather than overwhelming force was influencing strategic calculations at the highest levels of multiple governments. Her personal success was becoming a factor in broader geopolitical considerations. The transformation of an impossible mission into decisive victory was complete, but the implications of Sarah's achievement were only beginning to be understood. Her demonstration that innovative thinking could overcome apparently insurmountable obstacles had created precedents that would influence military strategy for years to come. The three enemy generals who had seemed untouchable had become symbols of how human nature, properly understood, could be turned into a decisive tactical advantage. The debriefing room was filled with an atmosphere of respectful amazement as senior officers gathered to hear first-hand accounts of Sarah's unprecedented achievement. General Morrison sat at the head of the conference table with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with genuine awe at what his subordinate had accomplished against impossible odds. The same room where skeptical voices had questioned her unconventional approach now buzzed with conversations about revolutionary changes in military tactical thinking. Sarah's detailed explanation of her psychological analysis revealed layers of planning sophistication that impressed even the most experienced military strategists present. Her identification of exploitable behavioral patterns in the three enemy generals had required months of intelligence analysis, combined with intuitive understanding of human nature under pressure that couldn't be taught in traditional military schools. The successful application of these insights had created a new paradigm for approaching seemingly impossible missions. Intelligence reports from the former enemy stronghold painted a picture of complete organizational collapse that extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Enemy units throughout the region were surrendering or abandoning positions as news of their commander's elimination spread through their communication networks. The psychological impact of Sarah's achievement was creating strategic opportunities that no one had anticipated when the mission was first proposed. The three enemy generals who had seemed invulnerable just days earlier were now subjects of detailed post-mission analysis that revealed how their professional competence had become the foundation for their own defeat. General Kozlov's punctuality, General Hassan's hands-on leadership style, and the third general's predictable communication patterns had all been turned into tactical weaknesses through Sarah's understanding of military psychology. Their strengths had become their vulnerabilities. Military academies around the world were already requesting detailed case studies of Sarah's operation for inclusion in their tactical curriculum. The integration of psychological analysis with conventional military planning represented an evolution in strategic thinking that promised to influence how future officers approached complex problems. Her success had demonstrated that innovative thinking could overcome limitations that traditional military doctrine considered absolute. The broader strategic situation was developing in ways that exceeded even the most optimistic projections for Sarah's mission success. Enemy coalition forces throughout the theater of operations were showing signs of demoralization and organizational breakdown that suggested her psychological warfare had achieved effects far beyond the immediate tactical objectives. The elimination of three individuals had created cascading impacts throughout an entire military structure. Professional recognition for Sarah's achievement began arriving from unexpected sources as word of her success spread through international military communities. Defense analysts who specialized in unconventional warfare were praising her integration of psychological insight with precision tactical execution. The mission that had been declared impossible was becoming a landmark example of how individual innovation could overcome systemic limitations. General Morrison's final assessment of the operation reflected both personal pride in Sarah's achievement and professional recognition of its broader implications for military strategy. His initial skepticism had been completely overcome by results that demonstrated the power of thinking beyond conventional limitations. The officer who had questioned the feasibility of her approach was now advocating for fundamental changes in how the military approached complex tactical problems. The psychological impact on friendly forces throughout the command structure was creating positive effects that extended far beyond the immediate mission success. Officers at all levels were beginning to reconsider assumptions about what was possible when conventional approaches failed to produce results. Sarah's achievement was inspiring innovative thinking that promised to influence military effectiveness across multiple operational areas. International media coverage of the successful mission was carefully controlled to protect operational security, while highlighting the achievement's significance for democratic military forces worldwide. The story of impossible odds overcome through individual brilliance and innovative thinking resonated with audiences who understood the broader implications for conflicts where conventional military superiority wasn't sufficient to guarantee victory. The enemy's response to their catastrophic leadership losses revealed the accuracy of Sarah's psychological analysis in ways that continued to validate her approach weeks after the mission's completion. Attempts to reorganize their command structure were failing because the individual commanders who remained lacked the specific combination of skills and authority that the eliminated generals had provided. The psychological foundation of their military effectiveness had been permanently damaged. Sarah's personal transformation from questioned innovator to recognized tactical genius was reflected in new responsibilities that recognized her unique analytical capabilities. Command structure adjustments were being made to ensure that her psychological insights could be applied to other seemingly impossible challenges facing military forces in complex operational environments. Her success had created opportunities for career advancement that matched her demonstrated abilities. The long-term implications of her achievement extended beyond immediate military applications into broader discussions about the role of individual innovation in organizational success. Business schools and management consultants were studying her approach for lessons that could be applied to civilian challenges where conventional solutions had proven inadequate. The principles she had demonstrated were showing relevance far beyond military tactical situations. The final chapter of an impossible mission had become the opening page of a new approach to solving complex problems through understanding human psychology and exploiting predictable behavioral patterns. Sarah's success against 3 enemy generals had proven that individual insight and innovative thinking could overcome apparently insurmountable obstacles when conventional approaches reached their limitations. The impossible had become possible. Through the power of understanding human nature at its most fundamental level, her legacy was already being written in military history books as an example of how one person's refusal to accept conventional limitations had changed the strategic balance in a critical conflict. The 3 enemy generals who had seemed untouchable had become proof that no defensive position was truly impregnable when faced with innovative thinking, backed by psychological insight and tactical precision. The mission that everyone said was impossible had become the foundation for a new understanding of what military forces could accomplish when conventional wisdom was challenged by genuine innovation.